Have you ever looked at a perfect couple and wondered what happens when the doors close? I'm talking about the kind of couple you see in magazines, the tech millionaire and his beautiful, elegant wife. From the outside, they had it all: a stunning waterfront mansion, a life of charity galas, and a love story that seemed unshakable. But a single lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume and a late-night text message were all it took to shatter the illusion. She thought her world was ending when she caught her husband with his young, ambitious secretary. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that for 10 years she'd been nurturing a secret of her own. A secret hidden in plain sight, a secret bank account that was about to change everything. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about the devastating power of underestimation. The chandeliers in the ballroom of the Seattle Art Museum, dripped with crystal casting fractured rainbows across the polished marble floor. Amelia Hayes smoothed the silk of her midnight blue gown. A serene smile fixed on her face as she listened to the mayor drone on about urban renewal. Beside her, her husband, Richard Hayes, stood as a paragon of modern success. His tailored Brioni suit, the subtle glint of his Patek Philippe watch, and the easy confidence in his posture all screamed power. He was the founder and CEO of Hayes Innovations, a titan of the city's booming tech scene, and she was his perfect accessory. For 12 years, this had been her life. She'd orchestrated flawless dinner parties, chaired committees for charities that sounded noble, and cultivated an air of effortless grace. She had given up her own budding career in financial analysis to manage their life, a role Richard called being the CEO of the Hayes household. At first, it sounded like a compliment. Now it felt like a cold, albeit a beautifully gilded one. Their Medina waterfront home was a testament to his success, and her taste a sprawling architectural marvel of glass and steel, softened by her choice of warm woods and plush neutral fabrics. It was a silent, sterile palace where the only sounds were the soft lapping of Lake Washington against their private dock and the hum of the climate control system. It was perfect. It was cold. The first tremor of unease had been subtle, a discordant note in the symphony of their perfect life. It started a few months ago. Richard, once meticulously punctual, began coming home later and later, smelling of the city exhaust fumes, expensive whiskey, and something else. A faint, sweet floral scent that wasn't her Chanel No. 5. When she'd asked, he'd waved a dismissive hand. That new client from Paris, darling. They all bathe in the stuff. You know how it is, endless meetings to close the Aerion deal. She had accepted it. To question him felt like a betrayal of the trust their empire was built on. But the excuse wore thin as the late nights became more frequent. Then came the phone habits. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually in his pocket or placed screen down on his nightstand. A new passcode he'd claimed for enhanced corporate security. Tonight at the gala, he was more distracted than usual. While Amelia engaged with the wives of other tech moguls, discussing summer plans in the San Juans and the merits of private versus public schools, Richard's eyes kept darting towards the entrance. He checked his phone constantly, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Everything all right, darling?" she asked, laying a delicate hand on his arm as they found a moment alone near the silent auction tables. He started pulling his arm away a fraction too quickly. Fine. Just a server issue at the Frankfurt data center. Always a fire to put out." He gave her a smile that didn't reach his cool grey eyes. "You look stunning tonight, Amy. Truly." The compliment, once a source of warmth, now felt like a well-rehearsed line, a verbal pat on the head. He used her nickname, Amy, when he was placating her. She was Amelia when he was presenting her to the world, and Amy when he needed her to fade into the background. Later, as they were leaving, the valet brought their Bentley around. Richard was on the phone, his back to her, his voice low and urgent. "No, not now. I told you to wait. Just be patient. I'll handle it." He hung up abruptly as she approached. "Frankfurt again?" she asked, her voice light, betraying none of the cold dread coiling in her stomach. "You know it," he said, forcing a weary sigh. "The price of success." The drive home was silent. Richard stared out at the glittering lights of the 520 bridge, lost in a world she was clearly not a part of. Amelia watched his reflection in the window. The handsome face she had fallen in love with now seemed like a mask hiding a stranger. Who was this man? And who was he talking to with such clipped intimacy? Back in their cavernous home, the silence was even more profound. Richard went straight to his study, closing the heavy oak doors behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the marble foyer, like a cell door locking. Amelia stood alone, the shimmering crystals of the chandelier above, casting long, dancing shadows that felt like grasping fingers. She walked into their master bedroom, a space designed to look like a 5-star hotel suite, and just as impersonal. On his side of the bed, on the polished mahogany nightstand, his phone lay face down. A forbidden object. For 12 years, she had never once felt the urge to violate his privacy. Their trust, she had believed, was absolute. But trust was a currency, and hers was rapidly devaluing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was foolish. Paranoid. She was the wife of a powerful man. Of course, he had secrets. Corporate secrets. That's all this was. But the memory of that floral scent, the clipped phone call, the distance in his eyes, it all coalesced into a single unbearable weight of suspicion. With trembling fingers, she picked up the phone. The screen was dark. She pressed the side button. A notification glowed on the lock screen, a message preview from a name she didn't recognize, Chloe Vance. The message was only 2 words, but they detonated her world. "Miss you. Chloe Vance." The name sounded vaguely familiar. Amelia's mind raced, sifting through company newsletters and event photos. And then it hit her. Chloe. Richard's new executive assistant. A stunningly beautiful woman in her late 20s with sharp ambition in her eyes and a smile that was both dazzling and predatory. Richard had praised her efficiency, her dedication, her willingness to work the same insane hours he did. Amelia's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. The gilded cage she had so meticulously decorated had just revealed its bars. She was a prisoner in her own life, and the man she had trusted with her entire world was the warden. The cold, hard reality settled over her, not with a fiery rage, but with a chilling, terrifying clarity. The life she thought she had was a lie. And as she stood there, bathed in the cold moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she felt the first flicker of a long-dormant part of herself begin to stir the sharp, analytical mind of the woman she used to be. The woman she had to become again if she was going to survive this. The days that followed the discovery of the text message were a masterclass in self-control. Amelia moved through her life with the programmed grace of an automaton. She hosted a luncheon for the Children's Hospital Foundation, approved floral arrangements for an upcoming charity auction, and smiled placidly as Richard explained another late night with the excuse of a new product launch. Every word from his mouth now sounded like static, the meaning lost in the deafening roar of his betrayal. She was watching a performance, and she was the only one in the audience who knew the lead actor was a fraud. She needed more than a single text message. A 2-word text could be explained away, twisted with the casual gaslighting Richard had perfected over the years. He would call her crazy, insecure, paranoid. She needed something undeniable, something so concrete it would shatter his carefully constructed world of lies. The analytical part of her brain, the part that once navigated complex market trends and investment portfolios, took over. Emotion was a liability. She needed data. She started small. She paid attention to the credit card statements that came in the mail, statements she usually passed to their accountant without a second glance. Tucked between charges for Brooks Brothers and $500 client dinners, she found them recurring charges at a small, impossibly expensive florist in Pioneer Square, one she had never used. Bouquets of peonies and rare orchids sent to an office address, charges for dinners for 2 at Canlis and the Herb Farm restaurants they hadn't been to together in years. And the most damning of all, a charge from a boutique jeweler, Le Vian, for a delicate diamond necklace. A necklace she had never seen. The evidence was piling up, each receipt a brick in the wall growing between them. Yet it was still circumstantial. He could argue they were client gifts, corporate expenses. She needed to see it, to witness the betrayal with her own eyes. The opportunity came the following Friday. Richard called her in the afternoon, his voice smooth and apologetic. "Darling, I'm so sorry. The investors from Singapore just landed, and we have to do a full-day strategy session tomorrow. It's going to run late all day Saturday. I'll have to miss the charity polo match. Can you make my apologies?" The polo match was their social highlight of the season. For him to miss it was unheard of. The lie was so audacious, so bold, it left her breathless. She played her part. "Oh, Richard, what a shame." "Of course I understand. Work comes first. I'll handle everything." "You're the best, Amy. I'll make it up to you, I promise," he'd said, the lie dripping from his tongue like honey. On Saturday morning, she watched him pack a briefcase, feigning concern. "Will you be staying at the company's downtown apartment? It might be easier than driving back late." "Good idea," he said, kissing her cheek. The gesture felt obscene. "Don't wait up for me." As his Bentley pulled out of the long, winding driveway, Amelia's composure crumbled. She sank onto the cold marble of the foyer, the facade of the perfect wife, dissolving into a storm of silent, gut-wrenching sobs. But as the tears subsided, they were replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This was it. She had done her research. A week ago, she had quietly installed a GPS tracker on his car, a small magnetic device she'd bought online. It felt like a sordid, desperate act, but desperation was now her reality. She opened the app on her phone. His car wasn't heading towards the Hayes Innovations headquarters downtown. It was heading north towards the picturesque seclusion of the Salish Lodge, the luxury hotel perched atop the breathtaking Snoqualmie Falls, a place known for romantic getaways. She changed out of her equestrian whites and into a simple pair of jeans and a dark jacket, pulling her hair back and hiding her face behind a pair of large sunglasses. She drove her own car, a modest Lexus SUV that Richard called her errand car, feeling like a spy in her own life. The hour-long drive was a blur of numbing dread and furious adrenaline. She parked at a distance, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The app showed his car was in the guest parking lot. Now what? She couldn't just storm the lobby. She needed to be sure. She waited the minutes, stretching into an eternity. An hour passed, then 2. She was about to give up to convince herself she was wrong when she saw them. They emerged from the hotel's main entrance, hand in hand. Richard was laughing a genuine, carefree laugh she hadn't heard directed at her in years. And beside him, looking up at him with undisguised adoration, was Chloe Vance. She was wearing a beautiful summer dress, and around her slender neck, catching the afternoon sun, was a delicate diamond necklace. The necklace from Le Vian. The sight was so cinematic, so perfectly staged it felt unreal. It was the confirmation she needed, but seeing it was like a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The world tilted on its axis. For a moment she thought she might be sick. They weren't rushing. They ambled towards the scenic overlook, the one famous for its panoramic view of the falls. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close and whispering something in her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. He leaned in and kissed her a long, lingering kiss, filled with a passion he no longer showed Amelia. Amelia's hand instinctively went to her phone. She didn't know why, but she raised it, the lens shaking in her trembling grip. She zoomed in her finger, hovering over the button. The image filled her screen. Her husband, the man who had promised to love and cherish her, kissing his assistant against the romantic backdrop of a waterfall, the stolen necklace glittering at her throat. Click. The sound of the digital shutter was a gunshot in the silent car. She took another and another. Cold, irrefutable proof. The rage she had been suppressing for weeks finally erupted a white-hot inferno that burned away the tears and the shock, leaving behind something new, something solid and unyielding. She didn't confront them. What was the point? A screaming match in a hotel parking lot. That was a scene from a bad movie. Her play would be on a different stage entirely. She put the car in reverse, her movements steady and precise. She drove away from the falls, away from the smoldering wreckage of her marriage, not looking back. The woman who drove to Snoqualmie Falls was a heartbroken wife. The woman who drove back to Seattle was an architect, and she was about to start drawing up the blueprints for Richard's demise. The drive back to Medina was a study in profound silence. The roaring waterfall was replaced by the low hum of the Lexus, a sound that seemed to amplify the ringing in Amelia's ears. She did not cry. The images she had captured were seared onto her mind, a digital monument to her husband's treachery. The grief was there, a vast hollow cavern in her chest, but it was overshadowed by a chilling razor-sharp focus. The question was no longer if her marriage was over, but how she would orchestrate its end. When she arrived back at the empty, echoing house, she didn't go to their bedroom, a room now tainted by his lies. Instead, she walked directly to the library. It was her sanctuary, the one room in the house that felt truly hers, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books on history, art, and finance. It was the place she retreated to when the vapid social obligations became too much. She sat down at the antique mahogany desk that had belonged to her grandmother, Eleanor. Eleanor had been the true matriarch of their family. A sharp, fiercely independent woman who had built a small fortune in real estate long before it was common for women to do so. She had always been wary of Richard's slick charm. A man who shines that brightly in public, she used to say, often casts the darkest shadows at home. Before she passed away 10 years ago, Eleanor had pulled Amelia aside. "Your husband is a successful man, Amelia, but success can make a man careless. It can make him think he is invincible. Never, ever let your security depend entirely on a man, no matter how much you love him." A week later, her grandmother's lawyer had contacted her. Eleanor had left her an inheritance of $250,000, but with a strict and secret stipulation, it was to be deposited into a private bank account under Amelia's maiden name, an account Richard was to know nothing about. "This is your escape hatch," the letter from her grandmother read. "I hope you never have to use it, but if you do, make sure it's a golden one." For 10 years, that account had been her secret. It was her one act of private rebellion in a life of public compliance. In the early years of her marriage, before Richard's success had exploded, he had often belittled her financial acumen. "Darling, you're brilliant with charities and guest lists," he'd say, with a condescending smile. "Leave the numbers to me. The market is a brutal place for amateurs." The insult had stung, but it had also ignited a spark of her old self, the summa cum laude graduate in economics, the woman who had been at the top of her analyst training program at Goldman Sachs before she met him. So she had taken her grandmother's gift not as an escape hatch, but as a challenge. She opened her laptop, a sleek personal device Richard didn't even know she had, and logged into a heavily encrypted portal. The screen flickered to life, displaying the dashboard of a Swiss bank account under the name Amelia Sterling. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She hadn't been idle for the last decade. While Richard saw her as a socialite managing caterers, she had been managing a burgeoning portfolio. She had spent her quiet afternoons when Richard assumed she was at yoga or having lunch, studying global markets, analyzing emerging tech sectors, and making shrewd, calculated investments. She pored over quarterly reports and market analyses with the same intensity she applied to planning a gala. She'd invested in biotech startups he'd dismissed as frivolous. She'd shorted a real estate bubble he had been convinced would never burst. She'd bought into renewable energy, companies long before they were fashionable. She had played the long game, her strategy patient, diversified, and entirely invisible. The initial $250,000 had grown. Steadily at first, then exponentially. She watched the number on the screen settle the final tally of 10 years of silent, diligent work. $14,782,416.38. A gasp escaped her lips. She had known it was substantial, but seeing the final figure laid out in stark black and white was staggering. It was more than just money. It was power. It was independence. It was a golden escape hatch, just as her grandmother had intended. But as she sat there, the photo of Richard and Chloe burning in her mind, she realized it could be so much more. An escape was too passive. This fund wasn't a shield. It was a sword. Richard's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He believed he was the only financial genius in their marriage. He saw her as decorative, intellectually soft, incapable of understanding the complex world in which he operated. He had no idea that the amateur had been quietly running her own private hedge fund from the library of their home. A plan began to form. Not a frantic, emotional reaction, but a cold, strategic campaign. A simple divorce was not enough. A man like Richard wouldn't just lose a wife. He would spin the narrative painting her as a disgruntled, money-hungry spouse. He would protect his public image at all costs. To truly make him pay for the years of condescension and the ultimate betrayal, she had to hit him where he lived, his company, his legacy, his pride. She spent the rest of the weekend not weeping, but working. She delved into the public financials of Hayes Innovations, but this time with a new adversarial perspective. Richard was preparing for a massive merger with the German tech conglomerate Arion. It was the deal he'd been working on for over a year, the one he claimed was responsible for all his late nights. He had told the board and investors it would make them the undisputed leader in their field. But Amelia, reading between the lines of the press releases and shareholder reports, saw something else. The deal was structured in a way that seemed to disproportionately benefit Richard's personal stock options and holding companies while leveraging the company with an immense amount of debt. It was a golden parachute for him, but a potential anchor for the company he'd built. It was risky. It was arrogant. It was pure Richard. And it was his vulnerability. She closed the laptop as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the library. Richard would be home soon, full of fake apologies and tired excuses about his grueling work session. Amelia stood up, her back straight, a newfound strength settling deep in her bones. She would play her part one last time. She would be the gracious, understanding wife. She would smile and she would nod. But behind the smile, the architect of silence was designing a new world, one built not on his lies, but on the foundations of his ruin. The game had changed. He just didn't know he was playing. The next few weeks were a delicate, dangerous dance. Amelia maintained the veneer of normalcy with a discipline that surprised even herself. She listened to Richard's embellished stories about the Arion merger negotiations, feigning interest and offering supportive smiles. Inside, she was a whirlwind of focused activity, operating with the covert precision of a spy. Her days were no longer filled with charity committee meetings and social calls. They were spent in quiet consultation with a new, very different kind of team. Her first move was to hire Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was not a typical high-powered divorce attorney from a glossy downtown firm. She was a legend in certain circles, a semi-retired forensic accountant turned private investigator who specialized in uncovering the financial sins of the rich and powerful. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that Amelia found immensely comforting. She worked from a discreet office in an old brick building in Georgetown, far from the gleaming towers where men like Richard made their fortunes. Amelia laid out the entire story in Evelyn's quiet, book-lined office, ending with the photographs from Snoqualmie Falls and the balance of her secret Swiss account. She expected a reaction shock, perhaps, or pity. Instead, Evelyn simply nodded, a flicker of grim appreciation in her eyes. "Good for your grandmother," Evelyn said, her voice a low rasp. "And good for you for turning it into a war chest. Most women in your position come to me with tears and suspicions. You've come with evidence and capital. This changes the entire dynamic." Evelyn's first task was to conduct a deep-dive financial audit of Richard and Hayes Innovations, using channels that wouldn't raise any red flags. While Evelyn's team began tracing the labyrinthine network of shell corporations and offshore accounts Richard used to hide his personal wealth, Amelia turned her attention to the company itself. She knew she couldn't simply dump her $14 million into Hayes Innovation stock. It would be too obvious and wouldn't give her the kind of leverage she needed. Her strategy had to be more subtle, more insidious. She began to build a different kind of portfolio. Working through her Swiss bank and a series of anonymous brokerage accounts set up by Evelyn's contacts, Amelia began acquiring strategic assets. She didn't just buy stock in Hayes Innovations. She bought shares in its key suppliers. She invested in the small, innovative tech firms that Richard's company relied on for crucial patents and components. She bought into the logistics companies that handled their distribution. She was weaving a web, and every strand she acquired gave her a small, unseen measure of control over the ecosystem in which Richard's company operated. Her most audacious move was directed at the Arion merger itself. Using a cut-out and independent investment firm in Luxembourg, that Evelyn vetted Amelia began quietly purchasing shares of Arion. The German company's stock was undervalued as the market was nervous about the debt they would be taking on in the merger. But Amelia's research, combined with the inside knowledge she'd gleaned from Richard's own unguarded comments over the years, told her that Arion's core technology was far more valuable than its current stock price reflected. Richard was, in essence, trying to buy a diamond for the price of glass. Amelia's days took on a new rhythm. Mornings were for playing the part of Mrs. Hayes. Afternoons were spent in encrypted video calls with Evelyn or poring over financial data in her library, the door securely locked. She learned that Richard had set up a generous private slush fund disguised as a corporate development budget, which he used to finance his life with Chloe. The apartment where Chloe lived was leased by a shell corporation owned by Hayes Innovations. The car she drove was a company car. He wasn't just having an affair, he was embezzling company funds to pay for it. Evelyn delivered the information without emotion, just a series of damning spreadsheets and documents. "He's arrogant, and arrogance makes men sloppy," Evelyn stated. "He thinks the company is his personal piggy bank. The board might be willing to overlook a discreet affair, but this is fraud. This is a breach of fiduciary duty." The knowledge was sickening yet empowering. Each piece of evidence was another stone in the foundation of her case. Richard's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a deep-seated character flaw, a rot that permeated every aspect of his life. He felt entitled to take whatever he wanted: her career, her trust, his company's money, without consequence. One evening, Richard came home in a triumphant mood. He poured 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to her with a flourish. "To the future, Amy. We're in the final stages. A few more details to iron out, and the Arion deal is done. This will cement my legacy." Amelia raised her glass, her expression carefully neutral. "That's wonderful, Richard. You've worked so hard for this." "It's all been for us," he said, looking at her with an earnestness that made her stomach turn. "To secure our future." She smiled, a cold, brittle thing. "Our future." She repeated the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. She took a sip of the champagne, its bubbles fizzing on her tongue. It tasted like victory, but not the victory he was celebrating. She was no longer just building a case for divorce. She was building an arsenal. And as she looked at her husband, so smug and self-assured in his presumed triumph, she knew he had absolutely no idea he was standing on a battlefield of her creation. The day of the final board meeting to approve the Arion merger arrived with the kind of crisp, clear Seattle sky that felt like a lie. For Richard, it was supposed to be the coronation of his career. For Amelia, it was Judgment Day. In the week leading up to it, Evelyn's work had culminated in a thick, meticulously organized binder. It contained bank statements, lease agreements, email trails, and sworn affidavits. It was a complete and utter demolition of Richard Hayes's professional and personal life. Armed with this, Amelia's lawyer had drafted the divorce filing, but they held off on submitting it. The timing had to be perfect. Amelia's own preparations were complete. Through her various holding companies and the Luxembourg firm, she had quietly amassed a 7% stake in Arion, the German company. It wasn't a controlling interest, but it was enough to make her a significant minority shareholder, a voice that could not be legally ignored, especially in a contentious merger. More importantly, she now held sway over two of Hayes Innovation's key suppliers, giving her indirect leverage that no one on the board could possibly anticipate. The plan was audacious, a high-wire act with no safety net. Evelyn had urged caution. "You have enough to ruin him in a divorce court, Amelia. You don't need to do this. It's risky." "A divorce court will give me his money," Amelia had replied, her voice steady. "I want his respect, and the only way to get that from a man like Richard is to beat him at his own game." The board meeting was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. at the Hayes Innovations headquarters. At 1:30 p.m., Amelia walked into the gleaming lobby of the skyscraper. She was not dressed as Mrs. Hayes, the society wife. She wore a bespoke graphite grey suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She looked like what she once was, and was again a formidable financial mind. She was met at the elevator by Michael Peterson, the company's general counsel and an old friend of Richard's. He looked at her in surprise. "Amelia." "What a surprise. Richard didn't mention you were stopping by. He doesn't know," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need a word with the board. It's a matter of shareholder importance." Confusion warred with professional obligation on Michael's face. "The board is about to go into a closed session for the merger vote." "I'm aware," Amelia said, stepping into the elevator. "That's precisely why I'm here." She arrived at the 40th floor, the executive level, and was escorted to the main boardroom. The long, polished mahogany table was surrounded by the company's board members, a collection of stern, powerful men in expensive suits. Richard was at the head of the table looking over his notes. When he saw her, his face went from shock to annoyance. "Amy, what on earth are you doing here? This is a closed meeting." His voice was a harsh whisper, meant for her ears only. "I'm here to speak as a concerned party, Richard," she said, her voice calm and carrying through the silent room. She placed a slim leather portfolio on the table, but did not sit down. Richard forced a laugh, turning to the other board members. "Gentlemen, my apologies. My wife is obviously confused. Amy, we can talk about this at home." "No, Richard. We'll talk about it now." From her portfolio, she produced a single document and handed it to the chairman of the board. A stoic man named Arthur Vance, no relation to Chloe. A cruel irony. "Mr. Vance, my name is Amelia Sterling. Sterling is my maiden name. I am the principal of the Sterling Group, a private investment firm registered in Luxembourg. My firm currently holds a 7.2% equity stake in Arion." A ripple of shock went through the room. Richard's face went pale. He stared at her, as if seeing a ghost. "What kind of joke is this Sterling Group?" "Amy, stop this nonsense." Amelia ignored him, addressing the board. "I have serious concerns about the proposed structure of this merger, specifically the debt load it places on Hayes Innovations and the disproportionate compensation package being awarded to the CEO. It seems designed less for the long-term health of this company and more for the short-term enrichment of its chief executive." "This is outrageous," Richard blustered, finding his voice. "She has no idea what she's talking about." Amelia then placed a second, much thicker binder on the table. "I also have concerns about a pattern of misappropriation of corporate assets by the CEO." She opened the binder, revealing crisp copies of the apartment lease for Chloe Vance, receipts for jewelry, travel itineraries for romantic getaways, all paid for through a corporate slush fund. This apartment, these trips, these gifts, all for Mr. Hayes' executive assistant, Chloe Vance, were billed to a corporate development account. I believe the term for that is embezzlement. A clear and profound breach of fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders. The silence in the room was absolute. The board members stared first at the documents, then at Richard, whose face had drained of all color. He looked at Amelia, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and pure fury. He saw for the first time not the compliant wife he had molded, but the brilliant woman he had tried to erase. As a significant shareholder in the company you are about to acquire, Amelia continued, her voice cutting through the tension like glass, the Sterling Group cannot and will not approve this merger under the current leadership. We have no confidence in Mr. Hayes's governance or his character. We will be voting our shares against the acquisition and will be encouraging other institutional investors to do the same, citing these financial irregularities. She had him. He was trapped between the personal humiliation and the professional detonation. If the board backed him, she would leak the documents and crater the Aryan deal from the outside, likely triggering an SEC investigation. If they sided with her, his reign was over. Arthur Vance, the chairman, finally broke the silence. He looked at the damning evidence, then at Richard's ashen face. His expression was grim. "Richard," he said, his voice heavy with finality, "I think it's best if you and your wife step outside while the board confers." It was a dismissal, a coup delivered not by a corporate raider, but by the woman he thought was at home planning a dinner party. As Amelia turned and walked towards the door, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor, Richard remained frozen, staring at the ruins of his life spread across the boardroom table. The gilded cage was gone, and the woman who had emerged was someone he didn't know at all. The boardroom doors closed with a soft, definitive click, sealing Richard's fate. Amelia didn't wait in the hallway. She strode to the elevator, her composure a mask of ice over a maelstrom of emotions. She felt a grim satisfaction, a surge of vindication, but no joy. This was a demolition, and even a necessary one leaves rubble. Richard stumbled out of the boardroom a few minutes later, his face a mask of disbelief. He caught up to her. Just as the elevator arrived, Amelia. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You've destroyed me. You've destroyed everything we built." The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside. He followed the doors, closing them into a small mirrored box. For the first time, she saw raw, unfiltered panic in his eyes. The charming, powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate man. "We didn't build this, Richard," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You built a company, and I built a home, and you desecrated both. You think this is about your affair. This is about the breathtaking arrogance of your deceit. You lied to your wife, you lied to your board, and you stole from your own company. The only person who destroyed you is the man in the mirror." "Chloe." She meant nothing. He pleaded a pathetic last-ditch effort. It was a mistake. Was it a mistake to put her up in a corporate apartment? Was it a mistake to buy her jewelry with shareholder money? Amelia's voice was like chipping ice. She wasn't a mistake, Richard. She was a business expense. And that's the part they'll never forgive you for. The elevator reached the lobby. As the doors opened, Amelia stepped out, leaving him standing there amidst his own shattered reflection. She didn't look back. The fallout was swift and brutal. By the end of the day, the board of Hayes Innovations had requested Richard's immediate resignation. Faced with the threat of a full-blown SEC investigation and a shareholder lawsuit led by the mysterious and suddenly powerful Sterling Group, he had no choice but to accept. The news of his departure, citing personal reasons, was sent out in a sterile press release by morning. The Aryan merger was put on indefinite hold. The German company, spooked by the sudden leadership change and rumors of financial impropriety, backed away. Richard's legacy, the deal meant to cement his place in the pantheon of tech gods, had evaporated overnight. His personal life imploded with equal speed. When the news broke, Chloe Vance was unceremoniously fired. Her corporate apartment lease was terminated, the company car repossessed. Richard, stripped of his power and his corporate credit cards, was of no more use to her. Her calls to him went unanswered. She was collateral damage in a war she hadn't even known was being fought. The day after the board meeting, Richard arrived home to find the locks changed. A stoic security guard hired by Amelia handed him a box containing a few personal effects and a letter from her attorney. It informed him that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that he was to have no contact with her outside of their legal counsel. The Medina mansion, purchased before their marriage, and thus not community property under their prenuptial agreement, was hers. The story leaked, as it was always bound to do. The business journals were circumspect, speaking of a shareholder revolt and questions of corporate governance. The society pages were far more direct. Whispers turned into headlines. Tech titan Richard Hayes, ousted amid scandal. They painted a sordid picture of embezzlement and a tawdry office affair. The public image he had so carefully cultivated was shattered, replaced by the caricature of a greedy, cheating cliché. He was a pariah in the city he once ruled. Amelia, meanwhile, was shielded from the public fallout. She remained in the house on the lake, the silence now a comfort rather than a curse. She watched the news reports dispassionately. The man on the screen, hounded by reporters outside his lawyer's office, looked like a stranger, haggard, broken and small. A month later, they met in a sterile conference room to sign the final divorce papers. Richard looked 10 years older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed weariness. He didn't speak to her, directing his few mumbled words to his lawyer. He signed the documents officially dissolving their marriage and relinquishing any claim to her personal assets, a portfolio which his lawyers had discovered with astonishment was now significantly larger than his own diminished net worth. As he pushed the papers across the table, his eyes met hers for a fleeting moment. There was no anger left, only a profound, bewildered sense of defeat. He finally understood. He hadn't been married to a decorative object. He had been married to a queen, and he had been too blind to see the crown. Amelia signed her name with a steady hand. Amelia Sterling. It felt like coming home. She walked out of that office not as a scorned wife or a wealthy divorcee, but as the architect of her own life, ready to build something new on the land she had cleared. The months following the divorce were not a time of celebration, but of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. The media frenzy, a voracious but fickle beast, eventually moved on to the next scandal, the next fallen titan. Richard Hayes became a cautionary tale, whispered at cocktail parties and business lunches, a ghost in the city he once sought to conquer. Reports trickled in that he had sold his remaining devalued stock and moved to Scottsdale, disappearing into a life of sun-drenched obscurity and golf courses, a gilded purgatory of his own making. Amelia, however, did not disappear. Her first act as a truly free woman was to sell the cold glass and steel mansion in Medina. Before the realtors descended, she walked through its cavernous rooms one last time. The house, once a symbol of her success as the perfect wife, now felt like an elaborate museum exhibit dedicated to a life that was never truly hers. The sunlight streamed through the immense windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air where priceless art had once hung. The echoes of her footsteps on the marble floors sounded like a final lonely farewell. She didn't take the designer furniture, the curated art, or the custom Italian kitchenware. She took only her books, a small, beautiful painting of the sea her mother had given her, and a framed photograph of her grandmother Eleanor. Everything else represented a lie, and she was done with lies. She found her new home not in the secluded enclaves of the ultra-wealthy, but on a tree-lined street on Capitol Hill. It was a beautiful, historic brownstone, filled with the kind of warmth and character that can only be earned over a century. It had built-in bookshelves that groaned with history, a fireplace that crackled with life, and a small walled garden where she could feel the earth on her hands. The silence that filled this home was not the sterile, empty silence of the Medina mansion. It was a peaceful, contented silence, rich with the promise of a life authentically lived. For the first month, she did very little. She read, she gardened. She reconnected with the few friends who had known her before she became Mrs. Richard Hayes. She could have retired. She had the means to spend the rest of her days traveling the world in opulent comfort, managing her vast fortune from a distance. It was the life everyone, including Richard, had assumed she wanted. But as she sat in her library one rainy afternoon, looking at the staggering numbers in her portfolio, she felt a profound sense of emptiness. The money had been a weapon, a tool for liberation. But what was its purpose? Now, her eyes fell upon the photo of Eleanor, her grandmother's sharp, intelligent gaze, seeming to look right through her. She remembered Eleanor's words not just from her letter, but from a conversation they'd had long ago. Money is a tool, Amelia. It can build a cage, or it can forge a key. The choice is in the hands of the woman who holds it. Her grandmother had given her an escape hatch, a key, and in that moment, Amelia knew what she had to do. She wasn't meant to simply enjoy her freedom. She was meant to forge keys for other women. She liquidated a significant portion of her portfolio and began the arduous but rewarding process of creating the Eleanor Sterling Foundation. Its mission was simple, yet revolutionary in its focus to provide financial literacy education, legal aid, and seed funding for women seeking to escape abusive or controlling relationships. She knew firsthand that financial dependence was the strongest, most invisible bar on any cage. Her first hire was a woman named Jessica Morales, a sharp, passionate lawyer who had spent a decade working pro bono for domestic abuse survivors. Jessica was initially skeptical, arriving at their first meeting in Amelia's brownstone with a wary professionalism. She'd seen wealthy, bored divorcees start vanity charities before. "With all due respect, Mrs. Sterling," Jessica began. "It's Amelia," she corrected gently. "And I understand your hesitation, but I don't want to just write checks. I want to build a system. A woman who leaves an abusive partner doesn't just need a shelter for the night. She needs to know how to open a bank account he can't touch. She needs to understand her credit score. She needs the capital to secure an apartment and the skills to get a job that can support her and her children. She needs an escape hatch that leads to a sustainable future." As Amelia laid out her meticulously detailed business plan, complete with projected budgets, strategic partnerships, and a curriculum for financial education, Jessica's skepticism melted away, replaced by a dawning respect. Here was not a dilettante, but a strategist. The Foundation's office was not on the 40th floor of a skyscraper, but in a repurposed warehouse in Sodo, with exposed brick walls, large windows, and an open, collaborative atmosphere. It hummed with a quiet, fierce energy. One of their first grantees was a young woman named Sophie, who sat across from Amelia. Her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a cup of tea. She had just left a husband who had controlled every aspect of her life, giving her a small cash allowance each week and monitoring every penny she spent. He told me I was terrible with money. Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. That I was flighty and irresponsible, that I'd be lost without him. After 10 years, I believed him. When I finally left, I realized I didn't even know how to set up an online bill payment. Amelia listened, her heart aching with a familiar pain. She didn't share the details of her own story, but she shared its essence. The greatest lie you can be told is that you are not capable. She said, her voice full of a conviction that was both gentle and unyielding. He didn't think you were incapable. He was terrified of you discovering how capable you are. Your strength was there all along. We're just here to give you the tools to rebuild its foundation. Over the next few months, Amelia personally mentored Sophie. She drew on her old, dormant skills as a financial analyst, helping Sophie draft a business plan for the graphic design company she'd always dreamed of starting. They went over budgets, marketing strategies, and pricing models. For the first time, Amelia was using her brilliant mind for finance, not to amass wealth, but to build a life. As she watched Sophie blossom, securing her first clients, signing the lease on a small office, and speaking with a confidence that had been brutally suppressed for years, Amelia felt a sense of fulfillment that no stock market victory had ever provided. Her legacy was not the spectacular downfall of Richard Hayes. That was merely the clearing of the land. Her true legacy was being built here, in this brick-walled office, with every woman who walked through their doors. On one wall of the foundation, Jessica had started a wall of futures, pinning up photos and thank-you notes from the women they had helped. A picture of Sophie cutting the ribbon on her new office. A note from a mother who had finally been able to afford a lawyer to win full custody of her children. A photo of a woman receiving her nursing degree. One evening, Amelia stood before the wall, tracing the smiling faces with her fingertips. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jessica. FYI, Sophie just landed the design contract for the city's new tourism campaign. She's officially a success. A genuine warm smile spread across Amelia's face. She looked out the large window at the bustling city lights, the same lights she used to watch from her gilded cage. She had been the perfect wife, then the perfect architect of a man's ruin. But now, finally, she was simply Amelia Sterling, master of her own foundation, building futures, one woman at a time. And her life had never been richer. Amelia's story shows us that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. She transformed her pain into a strategy and used the very skills her husband dismissed to reclaim her life and build a new legacy. It's a powerful reminder that underestimation is a dangerous game, and true strength isn't about the life you're given, but the one you have the courage to build for yourself. What did you think of Amelia's incredible journey from a betrayed wife to a powerful philanthropist? Do you think her revenge was justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your perspective makes this community what it is. If this story moved you or made you think, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of incredible resilience and unexpected twists. Thank you for listening.